Have you ever stopped to think about how you treat the person who cleans the floor you walk on? It might seem simple, but it's in these small moments that we reveal who we truly are. It's easy to treat a man in an imported suit with kindness, isn't it? The real challenge is offering the same respect to someone holding a broom. Today, you'll meet Clara, a woman who looks ordinary, dressed in a cleaner's uniform, ignored daily by the rich and powerful. She's ridiculed in public, treated as if she were invisible. These arrogant clients have no idea they're making the biggest mistake of their lives. But life has a curious and ruthless way of teaching lessons. In less than 24 hours, these very same clients will face a surprise that will turn their stomachs and force them to rethink every attitude they've ever had. Because, without suspecting a thing, Clara is not just an ordinary cleaner. She's a renowned expert, someone who has led international teams, fluent in several languages, and carries a resume that no amount of money could ever buy. And the most incredible part, tomorrow, those same arrogant men will be sitting across from her in a crucial job interview. That's right, you heard it. Now imagine this. How would you react if the person you humiliated yesterday turned out to be the one deciding your future today? This story is going to shake you. It will challenge you, make you question your own behavior, and maybe even stir up a discomfort that needs to be felt. Because respect doesn't depend on uniforms, titles, or status. Respect is about character. So take a deep breath and get ready, because what you're about to witness might just change the way you see the people around you forever. It was exactly 6:42 a.m. when Clara gently pushed the glass revolving door of the San Pietro building. The marble floor reflected the soft light from the crystal chandeliers, and the smell of expensive coffee was just starting to fill the air. She adjusted her hair, tied neatly in a simple bun, checked that her light blue uniform was clean, and pulled the cleaning cart behind her. No one greeted her. No good morning. It was as if, the moment she crossed from the sidewalk into luxury, she'd left her existence outside. And that's exactly where certain stories begin when someone is treated like a shadow in a world that only sees the shine of status. The Marx brothers were sitting in leather chairs, laughing at a video on their phones as they waited for the private elevator. Wearing tailored suits, they exuded a mix of imported cologne and arrogance. One of them even said, without lowering his voice, "Not enough to clean. Now she wants to walk with posture too." Clara heard it, but didn't react. She had learned, through pain, that those who don't respect others today will one day be taught by life itself. How many stories have already been lost to this same kind of arrogance? People who step on others, not realizing that sooner or later, the world turns, and the bill is always high. Clara's silence wasn't submission, it was wisdom. She watched everything with surgical precision. The way the brothers ignored the doorman, how they spoke about their own team with disdain, how they laughed loudly at others' mistakes. Clara wasn't just there to clean the floor, she was there to clean egos. She took note of everything, not on paper, but in her mind. And even while being treated as invisible, she already had more power there than all of them combined. Because real power lives in a clear conscience and the stories you choose to build even when no one is applauding. The accident was almost imperceptible. Clara, kneeling to pick up some papers near the reception, turned slightly and her elbow nudged a small table. The glass of orange juice fell in slow motion, spilling across the white marble floor like paint marking a scene. The sound of cracking glass echoed through the cold, silent hall like a sentence being passed. All eyes turned to her instantly, not with concern, but with that cruel judgment only those who think themselves superior know how to give. And that's how some stories begin, at the exact moment when a mistake becomes a spectacle. Look at this. The cleaning artist decided to make floor art now, laughed Eduardo Marx, joined by his brother and two light-suited guests. Drinks in hand, empathy, nowhere in sight. One of them immediately raised his phone and started recording, mocking, "This will go viral in the office group." Clara froze. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the cloth to clean the floor, and her face burned as if there was a sun inside her. She was a qualified, experienced woman, but in that moment, she was reduced to the day's punchline. It's outrageous to think that even today, so many stories of humiliation are still shared by people who see others only as a stage for their arrogance. But Clara didn't react the way they expected. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't even try to explain. With silent dignity, she cleaned the floor and picked up the shattered glass with calm movements, like someone gathering the broken pieces of her own soul. Inside her, something solidified the way life tests us just to see if we still believe in who we are. There she was, on her knees, with a firm heart, determined never to let them laugh at her like that again. These are the stories we carry like fuel, stories that burn on the inside, but light a fire no one can ever extinguish. If anyone stopped for even a minute to talk to Clara, they'd discover a breathtaking resume. A postgraduate degree in people management from the University of Lisbon, an MBA in strategic leadership, fluent in 3 languages, and more than 15 years of experience in multinational corporations. Clara had spoken at international conferences, mentored executives, and led billion-dollar mergers. But those who judge uniforms rarely see the full story. After losing her husband and daughter in a car accident, she sold everything, returned to Brazil, and chose cleaning as a purposeful pause. Because sometimes, before taking the next step, you have to stand firm on the ground of reality. And it's in the simplicity that great stories find a way to reorganize themselves. She wanted time. Time to cry, to breathe, to understand what remained of the woman once called a genius in human management. She found that time in the silence of the corridors. Among rags and buckets, where no one asked for KPIs only, cleanliness, there, among polished floors and elevators that ignored her. Clara observed the corporate world with trained eye spotting bad habits, arrogance, and vanity disguised as leadership. It was almost ironic. The same executives who paid fortunes for employee experience consultants couldn't even greet the woman cleaning their offices. It's within these contradictions that some of the most revealing stories are born, and she never stopped studying. At night, after long shifts, Clara would sit on the balcony of her small rented apartment and read about ESG, diversity, purpose, and emerging trends in global leadership. She kept a notebook full of notes, ideas, observations, and even project proposals she hoped to bring to life one day. She rewatched Simon Sinek TED Talks, read Brené Brown, and revisited her own training sessions delivered abroad. There was no resentment, only rebuilding. She knew the world could be cruel, but she also knew something others didn't. Great stories don't die when everything collapses. They're just preparing to be reborn, stronger than before. It was a modern room, with frosted glass walls, a light wood table, and a panoramic view of the city. The Marx brothers, dressed in their impeccable suits, had been invited for an exclusive interview with the new HR director at Avance, a benchmark company in human management and organizational culture. The role involved a multi-million-dollar contract and a high-impact social project, exactly the kind of prestige initiative they loved flaunting at events. They entered confidently, chatting about goals and numbers. What they didn't know was that they were about to experience one of those stories that stay with you forever, the kind no MBA teaches you how to handle. When the door opened and Clara appeared, time stood still. She walked to the head of the table with firm steps, wearing a sober suit, discreet heels, and a gaze that blended elegance with justice. She extended her hand first to the most arrogant of the two, without breaking eye contact. "Welcome. I'm Clara Noguera, Executive Leadership Director at Avance HR." They froze. The same eyes they had ignored in the lobby now stared back equal, or better yet, from above. One of them even stammered a Miss Clara, but she carried on naturally. Some stories explain themselves, just with the inverted reflection in the mirror of reality. They tried to mask the discomfort, but Clara didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone was an answer to all the jokes, laughs, and dismissals from the day before. In the corner, an assistant handed out the candidate dossiers while the clock ticked each second of that silent awkwardness. Clara didn't rush, she observed, and every second she remained composed was a punch to their egos, because those who master their emotions master the rooms they enter. And in the stories of true resilience, the silence of the oppressed is always louder than the noise of the oppressor. The interview was just beginning, but the roles had already been reversed. The room clock read 10:08 when Clara closed her folder, looked up, and faced the two brothers with a calmness more intimidating than any shout. Her question came sharp. "I'd like to know how you actually apply the pillars of organizational culture in your daily practices." The tone was neutral, but the weight of the question was immense. They shifted in their leather chairs, and one of them cleared his throat before answering with rehearsed phrases. "At our company, we promote respect, team appreciation, and care for the individual." Clara simply nodded, without smiling, as if hearing something utterly predictable. Some stories are so foreseeable they become sad before they even end. Then came the blade behind the curtain. "Interesting. And how does that statement align with the treatment given yesterday to a staff member in the lobby?" That was it. The mask dropped. The older brother tried to laugh it off, but his hand was sweating so much he had to discreetly wipe it on his pants. The other remained silent, jaw clenched, as if wishing he were anywhere else in the world. Clara didn't raise her voice, didn't point fingers. She simply let their own words crash into their actions. The discomfort, in that moment, became a lesson. Many important stories begin this way, when truth doesn't need scandal, just a mirror. She followed with another, even sharper question, "And how do you handle situations where your employees are humiliated or filmed without consent? Is there a protocol for that, or is it considered internal entertainment?" Silence, dense, heavy, cruel. They knew what she was referring to. They knew she was the woman from the day before. But Clara wasn't looking for a confession sheet, wanted awareness. She wanted them to feel, in their own skin, what it's like to be stripped of dignity in front of witnesses. And that lesson didn't come from books, it came from life. The most powerful stories don't need to be shouted, they impose themselves through the alignment of presence and truth. Clara leaned forward, gently resting her elbows on the table. Her eyes calmly scanned the pages before locking onto the eyes of the Marx brothers. The room was silent, as if time had stepped aside, out of respect. Then she said, in a firm, deliberate voice, "Shall we talk about inclusion, empathy, and leadership. The younger one forced a smile, tense, trying to lighten the mood with a sure, "Of course." The other crossed his arms, clearly uncomfortable. The tables had turned in, they knew it. Certain stories have that power. They flip the mirror and force you to look at what you've tried to hide for too long. "I want real examples," she added, "something that shows how you handle situations of disrespect within your company. And, if you'll allow me, I'd like you to consider what happened yesterday in the lobby." The atmosphere shifted, the ceiling fan seemed to spin slower, and even the clock hands hesitated. Eduardo cleared his throat, scratched his neck, and said that it was a misunderstanding. Murillo, the other, just looked down. Clara didn't interrupt. She just observed. This wasn't a competence test, it was a test of conscience. And in the most impactful stories, it's that kind of silence where the real lesson sinks in. When one of them tried to apologize without making eye contact, Clara remained composed. "I understand. But I'd like you to explain, sincerely, how your behavior yesterday connects with the values of empathy and respect you're defending here today." The air grew heavier. It was as if the entire room was caught in a choked breath. The glass walls no longer protected, they now exposed. Clara wasn't speaking with anger, she was speaking with presence. And that presence, so full of truth, shook them more than any scream ever could. In many stories, embarrassment is just the beginning of change. And that change was about to become irreversible. Clara closed the notebook slowly, like someone finishing a chapter written with dignity. The click of the cover echoed through the room like the sound of a final verdict. She folded her hands on the table, looked Eduardo and Murillo in the eye, and said, "Today's interview isn't about hiring someone. It's about revealing who's truly ready to lead." Her words landed softly but hit hard. The brothers froze. It was as if they finally realized they weren't in control, and that they were part of one of those stories they would remember for the rest of their lives, even if they wanted to forget it. She stood up slowly and walked over to the glass wall, where the city stretched out across the horizon. She opened the blinds slightly, letting the morning light touch her face. "This project is a partnership with the Ministry of Human Development. We're looking for leaders who know how to listen, to care, to respect. Real people." Her voice was steady, yet carried something deeper, a generosity that only those who have endured pain without becoming bitter can carry. "You were being observed, and yesterday, in the face of a real situation, you chose to laugh instead of protect, to ignore instead of act, to judge instead of understand. And it's in that kind of choice that great stories are defined." Clara returned to the table, picked up a sheet of paper, and read aloud. The approved candidate was an employee who demonstrated empathy, courage, and ethical conduct. It was the building's receptionist, the one who, even afraid, tried to intervene while everyone else laughed. The brothers were silent, completely. And in that silence, Clara concluded, "Leadership is not measured by power. It's measured by the ability to defend those who cannot defend themselves." It was a turning point, but not one meant to humiliate. It was the kind that educates, that transforms, because in the stories that touch us most, justice doesn't come through revenge, it comes through clarity. Clara remained standing for a few seconds, as if giving the two brothers a chance to breathe in the new atmosphere that now filled the room. They didn't know where to hide their wounded pride. Murillo rubbed his hands compulsively. Eduardo stared at the floor as if he'd forgotten how to act. Then, with the same calm she had from the start, she said, "Mistakes happen. But only those who face them head-on are able to grow." Her voice was low, yet firm, like a silent thunderbolt. And that's exactly what she wanted to provoke. Not humiliation, but deconstruction. Some stories begin with arrogance, but only flourish when they lay down in humility. She took 2 discreet envelopes from her leather folder and placed them on the table, one in front of each brother. "This is not a contract, it's an invitation. A human development program. A deep dive into leadership, empathy, and respect." The paper bore the seal of a well-known NGO and a partnership with Advanced. Clara paused, allowing them time to read. Murillo looked up as if asking for permission to understand. Eduardo bit his lip, swallowing hard. "It's optional," she added. "But sometimes, the only way out of the bubble is to go through what makes us most uncomfortable. And that's how some stories restart, through discomfort." Before leaving, she walked to the door, but turned back one last time. Her gaze now was softer, less inquisitive, almost compassionate. "You have potential. What's missing is truth. And truth is something we only find when we allow ourselves to break." The brothers said nothing. They had nothing to say, but they were there, finally silent, facing the one thing they had never confronted before, themselves. Clara then turned and walked out. The sound of her heels echoed down the hallway, leaving behind not a boss, not an executive, but a living lesson. Some stories don't teach with words, they teach with presence. A few weeks after the encounter with Clara, Murillo began doing something he had never done before, listening, truly listening. He sat in parts of the company he had never set foot in before. The storeroom, the break room, the parking lot. He arrived in silence, just observing. He didn't bring his phone, just his ears. And little by little, he began to hear stories. From a cleaning lady who dreamed of opening a beauty salon. From a doorman who took care of his mother with Alzheimer's. From a black intern who was afraid to speak up in meetings. These were real lives, pulsing all around him, and he had never noticed them, and that discomfort became fuel. It was on a rainy Saturday that Murillo showed up at a children's shelter in the north of the city. He arrived alone, no driver, wearing jeans, a t-shirt, and carrying 2 boxers full of toys. He didn't ask for photos, didn't make a fuss. He just sat on the floor, among the children, listening to their voices, their fears, their tiny joys. One of the caregivers approached him, suspicious. "Are you the owner of that company downtown?" He just smiled, without confirming, and said, "I'm trying to become someone better than I used to be." The words came out shyly, but sincerely, and it was there, on that wet floor, among scribbles and children's voices, that he began to understand what Clara meant. Some stories aren't told with words, they're written through actions. He didn't become a saint. He still made mistakes, he still stumbled into old habits, but he was no longer the same. He started taking interns to important meetings, created an internal scholarship program for employees, set up weekly discussion circles with the base team. Even Eduardo, the most resistant of his brothers, began to show up quietly, just listening. Clara wasn't closely following any of it. She was simply continuing her journey. But something inside her said, seeds planted with truth always bloom, even if, at first, they only look like silence. The stories that spark transformation are like that, quiet but immense. It was late afternoon, the sky painted with shades of orange, and Clara walked slowly along the same sidewalk where, months earlier, she had been humiliated. The San Pietro building, grand and imposing, remained the same mirrored windows, cold marble, discreet security guards. But Clara, she was no longer the same. She wore a beige linen suit, medium-heeled sandals, loose hair, and a glow in her eyes that no boutique could sell. She stopped for a moment in front of the entrance hall. No one noticed her. No one even remembered her. And still, she smiled. Because some stories are not meant to be seen. They are meant to transform from within. That's when she saw him. Murillo was coming out of the revolving door carrying a bag of groceries. He wore a simple t-shirt, jeans, and looked around as if searching for someone. Spotting an elderly woman sitting in the corner of the sidewalk, he walked over gently. He knelt down, handed her the bag, said something Clara couldn't hear, but felt. The woman smiled, and he smiled back. That scene, so simple, said more than any leadership speech ever could. Clara stood still, eyes filled with tears, as if witnessing the blooming of a flower she herself had planted in hard soil. And like so many other stories, that one was a harvest without an audience, but full of truth. She didn't approach, she didn't need to. She simply turned slowly and walked down the street, feeling the wind touch her hair like a gentle caress from destiny. With each step, she remembered the glass of juice, the laughter, the camera pointed at her, and also the receptionist who stood up for her, the envelope she left on the desk, the silent lesson she gave through her posture. And just before turning the corner, she whispered, "Respect doesn't wear a uniform. And if you don't learn that through love, life teaches you with a mirror." The sun slowly dipped below the horizon. And in that silent farewell, Clara wasn't just ending a walk, she was closing one of the most powerful stories she had ever lived. Now, stop for a moment and think honestly. How many people have passed through your life without ever being noticed? How many times have you crossed paths with someone in the elevator, at the supermarket checkout, or at the front desk of your building, and didn't even say good morning? The truth is harsh, but necessary. Respect cannot depend on a uniform, a salary, or social status. The story you've just heard is not just about a janitor who rose above her circumstances. It's about mirrors, about truths we avoid, about the kind of human being we are choosing to be every day, even when we think no one is watching. Because many of the greatest stories begin exactly where arrogance thinks it gets the last word. And here's a question that may hurt, but might change everything. What if tomorrow, you were interviewed by someone you treated poorly today? What if life decided to reverse the roles, just to test what lies behind your image? The world spins, my friend, and it spins fast. The way you treat those who have nothing to offer you says exactly who you are. Respect is not a courtesy, it's a foundation, it's structure, it's character in action. And if this story moved you, if it bothered you, inspired you, or made you remember something you'd rather forget, then maybe it's time to retrace your steps. Some stories are told to move, others to transform. So don't let this reflection end here. If you believe the world needs more awareness, more empathy, and less judgment, spread this message. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. With someone who might be treating others with superiority without even realizing it. And if you want to keep learning through stories that touch, challenge, shake your soul, and awaken the best in you, subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on the bell, because here, we don't tell stories just to tell them. We tell them to transform those who listen and those who live them.